Hey you all, it's Ronaldo here with a special episode of Thinking Ahead. It's actually an unplanned first episode because of the recent executive order that was signed and put out by the current president, Donald Trump, and I just wanted to kind of address it and what it may mean. But before I talk about what it may mean for the future of college education and what it means for funding your education, let me read the executive order directly. Okay, here it is. Presidential actions: improving education outcomes by empowering parents, states, and communities. Executive orders, March 20th, 2025. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, and to enable parents, teachers, and communities to best ensure student success, it is hereby ordered. Section 1, Purpose and Policy. Our nation's bright future relies on empowered families, engaged communities, and excellent educational opportunities for every child. Unfortunately, the experiment of controlling American education through federal programs and dollars, and the unaccountable bureaucracy those programs and dollars support, has plainly failed our children, our teachers, and our families. Taxpayers spent around $200 billion at the federal level on schools during the COVID-19 pandemic, on top of the more than $60 billion they spend annually on federal school funding. This money is largely distributed by one of the newest cabinet agencies, the Department of Education, which has existed for less than one-fifth of our nation's history. The Congress created the Department of Education in 1979 at the urging of President Jimmy Carter, who received the first ever presidential endorsement from the country's largest teachers' union shortly after pledging to the union his support for a separate Department of Education. Since then, the Department of Education has entrenched the education bureaucracy and sought to convince America that federal control over education is beneficial. While the Department of Education does not educate anyone, it maintains a public relations office that includes over 80 staffers at a cost of more than $10 million per year. Closing the Department of Education would provide children and their families the opportunity to escape a system that is failing them. Today, American reading and math scores are near historical lows. This year's National Assessment of Educational Progress showed that 70% of 8th graders were below proficient in reading and 72% were below proficient in math. The federal education bureaucracy is not working. Again, just reading from the executive order here. Closure of the Department of Education would drastically improve program implementation in higher education. The Department of Education currently manages a student loan debt portfolio of more than $1.6 trillion. This means the federal student aid program is roughly the size of one of the nation's largest banks, Wells Fargo. But although Wells Fargo has more than 200,000 employees, the Department of Education has fewer than 1,500 in its Office of Federal Student Aid. The Department of Education is not a bank, and it must return bank functions to an entity equipped to serve America's students. The order goes on to say, ultimately, the Department of Education's main functions can and should be returned to the states. Section 2. Closing the Department of Education and returning authority to the states. A. The Secretary of Education shall, to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law, take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return authority over education to the states and local communities while ensuring the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. B. Consistent with the Department of Education's authorities, the Secretary of Education shall ensure that the allocation of any federal Department of Education funds is subject to rigorous compliance with federal law and administration policy, including the requirement that any program or activity receiving federal assistance terminate illegal discrimination obscured under the label diversity, equity, and inclusion, or similar terms in programs promoting gender ideology. It continues in Section 3, General Provisions. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency, or the head thereof, or the functions of the Director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. This order shall be implemented consistent with the applicable law and subject to availability of appropriations. C. This order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any part against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. Signed, Donald J. Trump, the White House, March 20th, 2025. So, there is a lot to unpack here, and I could also read to you the fact sheet given from the White House about what the closing of the department and what the executive order is to do. However, there is so much more involved in that, and fact sheets are really there to make administrations look good. So anytime an administration has an executive order, they release a fact sheet to say what they are meaning to do, what their intention is to do, and usually they throw in a lot of dollar amounts and what that means to the general public. However, in proposal versus execution, there can be a vast difference of what that looks like. So I'm not going to look at the fact sheet because there is so much to unpack just from what he says in the executive order. First of all, let me state that when he says the Department of Education does not actually educate anybody, yes, of course. But you could also argue the Department of Defense does not actually defend anybody. It has agencies underneath it that actually do the defending and the monitoring and safety of our country. And the same thing is with the Department of Education. Department of Education just oversees the education within the states, and the biggest thing they do is oversee the disbursement of funds to every state's education department. So no matter what state you live in, you have a Department of Education that receives funds from the federal government, and then the state decides what to do with those funds. Now, there are certain laws that they do have to follow, including Title I and Title IX, which ensures that there are opportunities for poverty-stricken areas or low-income areas, while Title IX ensures that there is equal opportunity for women in schools. But this executive order, as it's stated, has to follow laws that are in place. Since I'm trying to make this a quick episode, I'm not going to go into full details on everything, but I will say this, that there's a lot more that needs to happen other than an executive order in order to eliminate the Department of Education. Anything that has so many other federal agencies tied into it, as well as Congress tied into it, needs to have Congress approval to dismantle it. Not only that, the federal oversight of the student loans, which is actually handled by subsidiaries and non-governmental agencies, does need to be handed off to the proper agencies before the Department of Education can close. Essentially, what they're trying to do is to put more work onto other departments. Now, seeing that they're trying to lay off all the Department of Education people, I don't think that this administration is looking to add more employees to the departments that are going to be overseeing the tasks that were handled by the Department of Education. So, who is going to handle the money that's supposed to go out to all of the school districts? Who's going to handle the legal aspects of ensuring that all students have equal access to education? Things like the Disabilities Act, the Title IX, equal chances despite gender. There are so many questions that need to be answered and need to be thought out before you can overreact. Long story short, stay tuned. But for those of you that are looking to go off to college, don't worry just yet. Now, what this may do, and it probably will add to it, is quicken or hasten the coming college bubble. Now, many people have talked about the college bubble burst that is going to eventually come. And what that is eventually we're going to reach a point where colleges can't afford to be as big as they are becoming. We already see many colleges closing down because of lack of student involvement and unable to raise tuition any higher. So, with the Department of Education restructuring, we may see student loans changing vastly in the future. A lot of colleges depend on student loans as income, so if student loans decrease in the future, you're going to see a lot of colleges start losing funding. And of course, if they lose funding, if they go into the red, they may start closing. And this is something that we all need to be aware of and be ready for in the future. But for now, pay attention, stay tuned, and we will deal with this issue more in the future. This has been Ronaldo Stevens with Thinking Ahead. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.